Imagine a shortcut so valuable it could shave 4,000 miles off a global journey. A project so ambitious it promised to turn a barren desert into the world's most profitable vein of liquid gold. In 1869, the Suez Canal opened to thunderous applause and a firework display that could be seen for miles. But while the world cheered, a superpower was quietly bleeding to death in the shadows. It wasn't a lost war or a sweeping plague that brought the Egyptian empire to its knees. It was a debt trap disguised as progress. Today, as global debt hits a staggering record-breaking $315 trillion, the ghosts of the Suez are screaming. We are repeating the exact same patterns of vanity, leverage, and predatory lending that erased Egypt's sovereignty from the map. Are we building bridges to a glorious future? Or are we digging our own collective graves? The answer lies in a history we've chosen to forget. To understand how a nation vanishes, you have to look at the man who tried to buy the future on credit. Enter Khedive Ismail Pasha. He wasn't a traditionalist. He was a visionary with an expensive habit. Ismail took the throne of Egypt in 1863, and he had a singular obsessive goal. He wanted to drag Egypt out of the Ottoman shadow and place it firmly in the center of the European high life. Ismail famously declared, "My country is no longer in Africa. We are now part of Europe." And he spent every penny he had, and billions he didn't, to prove it. He built 900 miles of state-of-the-art railways, 5,000 miles of telegraph lines, and over 4,500 schools. He transformed Cairo into a Paris on the Nile, commissioning grand boulevards and an opera house that rivaled those in London. But here is the financial reality. When Ismail took power, Egypt's national debt was a relatively manageable £3 million. Just 13 years later, that debt had exploded to £90 million. To put that in perspective, Egypt's total annual revenue at the time was only about £8 million. He was spending money he didn't have to build a lifestyle he couldn't maintain. Think of Ismail as the ultimate lifestyle creep victim. He was the homeowner who takes out a massive second mortgage to install a backyard oasis and a gold-plated kitchen, convinced that the value of his home will keep rising forever. He wasn't just fixing the roof. He was betting the entire house on a single project, the Suez Canal. The canal was supposed to be his ace. It was the ultimate infrastructure play. If Egypt controlled the gateway between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, they would hold the keys to global trade. They would be the landlords of the world. But Ismail made the classic mistake of every over-leveraged debtor. He focused on the potential revenue while ignoring the predatory nature of his lenders. Construction on the Suez Canal began in 1859, led by French diplomat Ferdinand de Lesseps. It was an engineering marvel that required the shifting of 75 million cubic meters of earth. But the human and financial costs were staggering. Because Ismail was so desperate for the canal to be finished, he agreed to terms that would make a modern payday lender blush. Egypt was forced to provide the labor. Tens of thousands of Egyptian peasants, or fellahin, worked in brutal conditions. Many thousands died from cholera and exhaustion. But Egypt also had to provide the bulk of the land and a significant portion of the capital. The original cost estimate was 200 million francs. By the time the first ship passed through in 1869, the price had ballooned to 433 million francs. To cover the shortfall, Ismail turned to the 19th century version of Wall Street, the banking houses of London and Paris. This is where the story gets dark. The European bankers knew Egypt was getting desperate. They began offering loans with nominal interest rates of 7%, but after taking out their massive processing fees, discounts, and commissions, the actual interest Egypt was paying was often closer to 12% or 15%. In some cases, for every £100 Egypt borrowed, they only actually received £60 in cash, yet they were required to pay back the full £100 plus interest. Then came the Black Swan event. During the 1860s, the American Civil War had broken out, cutting off the world's supply of southern cotton. Suddenly, Egyptian cotton was the most valuable commodity on the planet. Prices tripled. Ismail, seeing the money pour in, assumed this gilded age would last forever. He borrowed even more against future cotton revenues. But in 1865, the war ended. American cotton returned to the market. The price of Egyptian cotton plummeted. Ismail's primary source of income vanished in an instant, leaving him with a mountain of high-interest debt and an unfinished, expensive canal. By 1875, Egypt was effectively insolvent. Ismail was backed into a corner. He had one asset left: Egypt's 44% ownership stake in the Suez Canal Company. In a secret, desperate deal, he sold that entire stake to the British government for £4 million. The British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli famously crowed to Queen Victoria, "You have it, madam." Britain now controlled the world's most important trade route. But for Ismail, the nightmare was just beginning. He had sold the family silver to pay 1 month's rent. He lost the asset, but he kept the debt. In 1876, Egypt officially declared bankruptcy. The European powers didn't send a letter of sympathy. They sent accountants. They formed the Caisse de la Dette Publique, a commission of foreign creditors who took over the Egyptian treasury. They decided how much Egyptians would pay in taxes and how much of that money would go directly into the pockets of European bankers. Sovereignty was over. The empire was now a corporate subsidiary. If you think this is just a dusty story from the 1800s, you aren't looking at the world around you. Today we are seeing the Suez syndrome play out on a global scale. We call it infrastructure debt trap diplomacy. Look at the Belt and Road Initiative. In the last decade, developing nations across Asia, Africa, and Latin America have taken on trillions in loans to build massive ports, railways, and bridges. Just like Ismail, these leaders are promised a shortcut to prosperity, but the terms are eerily familiar. High interest, lack of transparency, and the requirement to use the lender's labor and companies. Consider Sri Lanka. They borrowed billions to build the Hambantota International Port. When the port failed to generate enough revenue to cover the interest on the debt, the Sri Lankan government was forced into a humiliating deal. In 2017, they handed over the port and 15,000 acres of land around it to a Chinese state-owned enterprise on a 99-year lease. This isn't just about money, it's about geography. Just as Britain used Ismail's debt to control the gateway to India, modern superpowers are using debt to secure strategic naval outposts and trade hubs. History isn't repeating, it's being remastered in high definition. But let's bring the echo closer to home. You might think, well, my country is a superpower, we can't be colonized by debt. That is exactly what the Khedive of Egypt thought. He thought his nation was too big to fail because of its strategic importance. He was wrong. In the West, we have built a modern canal of our own, a massive, sprawling social and military infrastructure funded entirely by the greatest expansion of debt in human history. The U.S. national debt is currently screaming past $34 trillion. To put that in perspective, if you spent $1 every second, it would take you over 1 million years to pay off that debt. And just like Ismail's cotton, our revenue is at risk. We are currently living through a period where interest rates have risen sharply to combat inflation. This has triggered the interest trap. How do you know when an empire has reached the point of no return? You look at the interest versus revenue ratio. In 1876, Egypt hit the wall. Over 50% of their total national revenue was going solely to pay the interest on their debt. They weren't even paying down the principal. They were just running on a treadmill that was getting faster and faster. When you reach that point, you are no longer a country. You are a debt servicing vehicle for your creditors. Today, for the first time in history, the United States is spending more on interest payments than it is on its entire national defense budget. More money goes to the ghosts of past spending than to the protection of the current citizens. We are currently spending over $1 trillion a year just on interest. We are currently in the great illusion. We believe that because our technology is advancing, because AI is booming, and because our canals of commerce are full, the debt doesn't matter. We tell ourselves that we owe it to ourselves, but history shows that debt is a neutral force. It doesn't care who you are. It only cares about the math. When a nation loses control of its currency and its credit, it loses its ability to choose its own path. The Egyptian people didn't vote to be occupied by the British in 1882. It was the natural, inevitable consequence of a financial collapse that started 20 years earlier with a visionary leader and a pile of easy loans. The Suez Canal is still there. Today, it's busier than ever, handling roughly 12% of all global trade. It is a massive success, but it took Egypt nearly 100 years, and a bloody revolution in 1952, to finally own the canal that was built on their land with their blood and their money. The lesson of the Suez is simple but haunting. You cannot borrow your way into a permanent golden age. Khedive Ismail wanted the prestige of an empire without the discipline of a balanced ledger. He thought he was building a shortcut to the future, but he ended up taking a shortcut to bankruptcy. Today, as we watch our national debts climb and our interest payments skyrocket, we have to ask ourselves, who is the modern-day caisse de la dette? Who will be the ones to step in when the Paris on the Nile can no longer pay its bills? We are living through the loudest echo of the 19th century. The question isn't whether the canal we are building, our modern economy, is valuable. It is. The question is, when the bill finally comes due, will we still own the land it's built on? Or will we be forced to watch as someone else collects the tolls? History is a circle, and right now we are approaching the part of the loop where the debt collectors arrive. History doesn't just repeat, it rhymes. So make sure you're listening for the next Money Echo subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.